Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really challenging set of sources today, I think. Something that might push back on some common ideas.
Definitely. We're looking at notes from a sermon by Pastor Noah Kim from the Cebu Korean Baptist Church.
That's right. And the topic is one everyone thinks they know. The destruction of Sodom.
Yeah, it's almost infamous, isn't it? But the angle here is different. We're not just focusing on the final act that everyone associates with the city.
Exactly. Most people jump straight to that moment, the one in Genesis. But this sermon argues that specific act, as horrific as it was, wasn't the start. It was the end result.
The rotten fruit, as the source puts it.
Right. The fruit of three deeper, more foundational sins that were apparently rotting the city from the inside out for a long time. And the sermon bases this on prophecy, specifically from the book of Ezekiel.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're
Yeah.
trying to get past the consequence, the symptom, and really excavate the root soil, you could say.
Yeah, what allowed that kind of extreme corruption to even take root and flourish?
And we'll be analyzing the three core sins the sermon identifies, looking closely at the scripture references, specifically using the King James Version, the KJV, as the source material really emphasized its wording.
And this reframing, it makes it less about some distant historical event and more, well, more personal, doesn't it?
It really does. Because if the roots were things like pride, or how people handled prosperity, or just apathy,
Then the big question becomes, what are those fundamental, maybe subtle failings that can lead to total collapse? Whether that's a society back then or maybe even, our own lives today.
a heavy question.
Definitely. So let's start where most people think the story begins.
Okay, part one, result versus root.
Sodom. The name itself is, well, it's become synonymous with a certain kind of extreme depravity, right?
Absolutely. The word sodomy derives directly from the city's name, Sodomai. And the story in Genesis 19, that's the picture everyone has in mind. It's the climax of the city's wickedness.
Yeah, let's look at that for a second. Genesis 19, specifically verses 4 and 5 in the KJV. Lot has taken in these two visitors, who are actually angels.
Offering hospitality, which was a sacred duty.
Right. And before they even settle down for the night, the men of the city surround Lot's house. And the text is pretty chilling. It says, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter."
That detail is crucial. Both old and young, all the people from every quarter. This wasn't some small group of deviants.
No, it sounds like the whole city was involved. And verse 5 continues, "And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them."
And that phrase, that we may know them in this context, is widely understood to mean to sexually violate them. It's horrific.
It is. And the source notes highlight that this wasn't just some random impulse. The fact that it was everyone, old and young, points to a complete systemic moral breakdown, an unbelievable level of corruption, and yes, extreme sexual perversion that God condemns.
And understandably, many conservative interpretations today focus heavily on this specific act. Sodom becomes the prime example of a sin that demands immediate, severe divine judgment.
Which is a valid point in itself, but this is where Pastor Kim's analysis pivots. He argues there's a huge misconception if we stop there.
Exactly. The danger, according to the sermon, is focusing only on that final, visible, shocking act.
Why is that dangerous?
Well, because it can lead to a kind of self-justification. We look at that sin, which seems so extreme, so far removed from our own lives, hopefully, and we think, well, I'm definitely not doing that, so I must be okay. I must be far from the kind of judgment Sodom faced.
I see. It lets us off the hook too easily.
Precisely. The sermon argues that this final act of depravity wasn't spontaneous. It didn't just appear out of thin air. It was the natural, almost inevitable consequence, the fruit that grew from a foundation that was already deeply toxic, spiritually and morally.
So the rot was there long before this specific incident.
That's the argument. And to understand that underlying failure, the source tells us we need to shift our focus from Genesis 19 to the prophet Ezekiel,
Okay.
specifically Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 and 50. These verses are presented as the blueprint for this whole deep dive because they list the root causes, the fundamental iniquity of Sodom.
Before mentioning the final abomination.
Exactly. The order is key. Let's read Ezekiel 16.49 from the KJV. It starts the list. "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters."
Okay, so pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness. Those are listed first as the iniquity.
Right. And then verse 50 finishes the thought. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good.
Ah, so the haughtiness and the abomination, the thing we usually focus on, come after those three root issues are listed.
That's the crucial distinction the sermon makes. The pride, the issues with abundance, the idleness. Those are the long-term, foundational spiritual problems, the iniquity. The extreme sexual sin is the abomination, the ultimate visible result that happened right before God's judgment fell.
So the structure itself tells a story. If you want to avoid Sodom's fate, you can't just condemn the final act. You have to look at what led to it.
You have to attack the roots, not just stare at the fruit, however rotten it is.
And the power in that, as he said earlier, is it makes the warning universal. Maybe most of us aren't involved in the specific acts from Genesis 19.
Hopefully not.
But pride, dealing with prosperity, spiritual apathy or laziness, those are things everyone struggles with, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're timeless human failings. They corrode individuals and communities everywhere, in every era.
Okay. So let's dive into the first root then, the one listed first in Ezekiel, which the sermon apparently calls the root of all sin.
All right, part 2. Root sin number 1, pride and haughtiness.
So Ezekiel 16.49 starts, "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom, pride." How does the sermon define this pride?
It makes a careful distinction, actually, between two related ideas. First, there's the internal aspect, pride itself.
Okay.
This is defined as exalting the self, a radical self-centeredness. It's that I focus, where your own desires, your own comfort, your own will becomes the absolute center of your universe.
Got it. Like making yourself the ultimate authority.
Exactly. And then there's the outward expression of that internal state, haughtiness or arrogance.
So how is that different from pride?
Haughtiness is pride turned outward. Because you've already decided you are the most important thing, you then naturally look down on or dismiss or even despise everything else.
Other people.
Other people, societal norms, traditions, rules, and crucially, any form of divine authority. Haughtiness is pride projecting itself onto the world, saying, nothing and no one else measures up to me or my desires.
Wow. So it's both an internal condition and an external attitude.
Yes. And this failure to submit, this self-exaltation, is why the sermon argues pride is actually the first sin ever committed, the original rebellion.
You mean like Lucifer?
Precisely. The source points directly to the account of Lucifer's fall in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 to 14 in the KJV.
Okay, I remember that passage. It's very striking.
It really is. Because it's almost a monologue of pure self-will, it perfectly captures the mindset of pride. The sermon highlights the repeated use of I will.
Yeah, it's like a drum beat.
Let's break down those 5 I will statements Lucifer makes.
I will ascend into heaven. He's rejecting his appointed place.
Okay.
Second, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. He's claiming superiority over other created beings, even angels.
Right.
Third, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. This is him seeking a position of divine rule, trying to take God's place on the symbolic mountain of assembly.
Wow.
Fourth, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. He's grasping for status beyond his created limit, aiming for the highest place in the visible creation.
And the last one.
The ultimate statement of pride. I will be like the Most High. That's the final goal. Not just to be great, but to replace God, to be God himself.
That repetition, I will, I will, I will. It really hammers home the point. Pride isn't just a feeling, it's a declaration of independence from God.
Exactly. It's a calculated rebellion. It's consciously setting aside God's plan, God's will, God's authority, and replacing it with my way, my plan, what I want. It's choosing self as the ultimate authority.
And the sermon argues this is like a gateway sin.
In a way, yes. Because once you reject divine authority, once you decide you are the final arbiter of truth and morality, what external check is left? It opens the door for everything else. There's no brake pedal anymore.
And the consequence for Lucifer was, well, catastrophic expulsion.
Utter destruction of his position and relationship with God. And the sermon draws a direct line. Sodom's fate was essentially sealed the moment they, as a community, adopted that same Luciferian mindset of self-exaltation against their creator.
Choosing radical self-sufficiency leads to ruin.
It has to. Because it's based on a lie. The lie that we are self-sufficient, that we don't need God or his structure.
The sermon uses an analogy for this, right? Something about runaway teenagers.
Yeah, it's quite a vivid picture. Think about a young person, maybe late teens, early 20s. They feel stifled by their parents' rules, their structure, their guidance. Their pride swells up. They think, I know better than them.
Yeah.
I don't need their rules. I can make it on my own. I'll be happier, more successful if I just do things my way.
That is familiar. A lot of people feel that way at some point.
Right. So they run away full of this mistaken confidence in their own abilities. They're fueled by the idea of self-sufficiency.
And at first, maybe it feels great. Freedom.
Exactly. It's exhilarating initially.
Yeah.
But then reality hits. Life outside that structure, without the support system they rejected, is often much harder than they imagined.
Resources run out.
Resources run out, they struggle to find stability, maybe they face hunger, loneliness, hardship. The analogy mentions them facing the cold, sleeping rough.
And the point is,
The point is, according to the sermon's analogy, they almost always come back. Usually when things get really tough, like the metaphorical cold winter setting in. They return because they realize their belief in total self-sufficiency was a devastating mistake.
they realized they actually needed the structure, the support, maybe even the authority they ran away from.
Precisely. Their pride led them to a place they couldn't sustain on their own. And that, the sermon suggests, is the story of Sodom in miniature. A society running away from God's structure, believing in its own sufficiency, only to find ruin.
And scripture backs this up pretty strongly, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Proverbs 16:8, the classic verse. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall, is almost a law of the spiritual universe.
And doesn't James say something about God resisting the proud?
Yes, James 4:6. God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. It's not just that pride leads to bad consequences. God himself actively opposes the proud heart.
So bringing this back to us, to the listener, the application isn't just don't be like Lucifer, it's more immediate, right?
Much more immediate. Sodom's judgment started with this internal posture, ignoring God's authority, prioritizing self-will. So the counter, the application for us, is cultivating daily humility.
What does that look like practically?
It means consciously setting aside our own plans, our own feelings, our own calculations, especially when they clash with what we understand to be God's will or a higher moral principle.
It's an active fight against that internal voice saying, I know best, or my desires come first.
Exactly. It's that constant choice. Will I submit my will or will I insist on my own way? That insistence on self-sufficiency, that's the path Sodom took. And it's the first root of their destruction.
Okay, that's a heavy start.
Yeah.
Let's move to the second root sin mentioned in Ezekiel.
All right, part 3. Root sin number 2, abundance of bread and neglect.
So Ezekiel 16:49 continues, and fullness of bread and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Fullness of bread, that one sounds, well, less obviously sinful than pride, maybe.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Having enough to eat, being prosperous, how is that a sin?
Yeah.
And the sermon is very clear. Wealth itself, or comfort, or prosperity, that's not inherently sinful. You can be a blessing, a gift, or maybe a responsibility.
Okay, so what's the problem then?
The sin isn't the having, it's the effect it had on them. It's the self-absorption that this fullness of bread created. And the rest of the verse spells it out.
Ah, right, it doesn't stop there, it continues. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy.
Exactly. That's the key. Their abundance became toxic because it led them to isolate themselves, to become completely self-focused, and to develop a hard heart towards anyone less fortunate.
So the prosperity fueled a delusion. Like, I earned this all myself, I'm comfortable, so why should I care about anyone else?
Precisely that. It feeds right back into pride, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I achieved this success, therefore I owe nothing. It gives people the comfortable ability to simply ignore those who are struggling socially, financially, spiritually.
Because their problems don't directly inconvenience my comfortable life.
Right. You can just look away.
Yeah.
The sermon contrasts this with the experience of the poor, who often have to rely on faith and community because they literally have no other safety net.
Whereas if you're wealthy, you feel like you've built your own safety net, your 401k, your insurance, your assets.
Exactly. And that can lead to feeling like you don't really need God's intervention, or you don't need that messy interdependence with other people quite so much.
And this danger, the spiritual danger of getting comfortable and forgetting God, is something the Bible warns about specifically, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The source material points directly to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 11 through 14. It's like a prophetic diagnosis of exactly this problem.
What does it say?
It's a direct warning to Israel as they're about to enter the promised land, a land of prosperity. Moses tells them, Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments, lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God.
Wow, that maps it out perfectly. Step one, you get successful, comfortable, everything increases.
You're full, good houses, lots of assets.
Step two, then thine heart be lifted up. That's pride kicking in again, isn't it? Thinking you achieved it all yourself.
Yes. And step 3 is the direct consequence, and thou forget the Lord thy God. The very source of the blessing gets forgotten because the blessing itself becomes the focus. You start believing you are the source.
And Pastor Kim apparently used a modern example for this from South Korea.
Yes, drawing from the context of his congregation and recent history. He observed that in the decades right after the Korean War, South Korea faced immense hardship and poverty.
A time of real struggle.
Exactly. And during that time, people clung fiercely to their faith. There was a lot of church growth, a strong sense of community, people sharing whatever little they had. Necessity kind of forced reliance on God and each other.
But then came the economic miracle.
Right. South Korea achieved incredible prosperity relatively quickly. And the observation in the sermon is that with this prosperity came a noticeable shift
Poured.
towards increasing self-focus, individualism. The intense drive for personal success, accumulation, consumption started to overshadow, in some cases, that earlier focus on communal faith and God's purpose.
Like the Deuteronomy warning playing out in real time.
Very much so. The sermon suggested this can even happen within the church, where the attitude becomes more about, is this church meeting my needs? Is it helping me succeed? Rather than a primary focus on collective mission or serving the needy, it's a subtle drift caused by comfort.
It makes me think of that common justification people use. Well, once I get successful, then I'll have enough money and time to help others.
The sermon tackles that directly. It challenges that whole premise of success first, service later,
How so?
by arguing that the command in Ezekiel, strengthen the hand of the poor and needy, isn't conditional on your own level of abundance. It's presented as a fundamental responsibility, something you do out of gratitude and obedience now, regardless of your own bank balance.
So waiting till you feel perfectly secure might mean you never actually get around to it.
That's the risk. It becomes an excuse for inaction, possibly rooted in that same self-focus that prosperity can breed.
This connects to other warnings about wealth, too, like the love of money passage.
Yes, 1 Timothy 6:10 is quoted, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows."
And notice it's the love of money, the prioritizing of it, not money itself.
Exactly. It's when accumulation becomes the driving force, the ultimate goal, displacing faith and compassion. That's when it becomes the root of all evil in someone's life.
And there's that verse in Luke, too, about life not consisting in possessions.
Luke 12:18. Jesus warns against covetousness, saying, "For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." Our culture constantly tells us the opposite, right? That our value is tied to what we own, what we achieve materially.
Yeah. Define yourself by your stuff, your status.
But Scripture draws a hard line against that.
Yeah.
And the ultimate reality check, the sermon points out, is death.
Right. You can't take it with you.
All the accumulated wealth, the houses, the investments, it becomes meaningless at that point. It all gets left behind.
Yeah.
So the piercing question the sermon poses, especially for those of us living in relatively comfortable societies, is where is your primary focus? Is it
Like-
solely on acquiring more for yourself?
Or are you actively, intentionally paying attention to the needs, spiritual and physical, of the people around you? Those who don't have that fullness of bread.
That's the application today. This fullness isn't just about food. It can be fullness of entertainment, digital content, leisure activities, self-care, anything that allows our lives to become so saturated with self-enrichment.
That there's simply no space left, no energy or attention for gratitude, for service, for noticing the needy.
Exactly. And that self-centered satisfaction, born from abundance and leading directly to the neglect of others' needs, that's the second powerful root the sermon identifies in Sodom's collapse.
Okay. Pride. Then this self-absorbed neglect fueled by abundance. What's the third root?
The third one ties them together, part 4. Root sin number 3, abundance of idleness or lethargy.
Back to Ezekiel 16.49 again. And
Yeah.
abundance of idleness was in her. Now, how is idleness being defined here? Because usually we think of like unemployment or just being lazy physically.
Right, but the sermon argues it's deeper than that. It's not primarily about lacking a job. It's defining this as spiritual lethargy,
Spiritual lethargy, meaning
meaning an indifference, a deep-seated apathy towards God's purposes and towards the needs of other people, a kind of spiritual laziness.
so Sodom's people weren't necessarily idle because they weren't working or making money.
No, they might have been very busy pursuing their own prosperity and pleasure. They were idle in the sense that they were completely unconcerned, uninvested in anything that mattered beyond their own physical comfort and luxurious lifestyle.
Especially given their fullness of bread and abundance we just talked about,
Exactly. They had the resources, they likely had the time freed up by their prosperity, but they were spiritually paralyzed when it came to doing what God actually expected of them.
which includes.
Well, connecting back to the previous point, showing charity, strengthening the hand of the poor, but also the sermon emphasizes the work of evangelism, caring about the spiritual state of others, the harvest, as Jesus called it.
Ah, okay. So their self-preoccupation led to a kind of moral and spiritual paralysis. They just didn't care enough to act.
They had the means, the opportunity, but not the will. And this links directly to Jesus' words in Matthew 9:37, which the source highlights. The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few.
Meaning there's much spiritual work to be done, many people who need help or need to hear the message, but not enough people willing to actually do the work.
Right. And the challenge thrown down is that today, many of us might be too comfortable, too distracted by chasing our own goals or entertainment, too caught up in the noise of modern life.
To be those laborers,
Mhm.
to fulfill the duties God asks of us, whether it's serving the marginalized or sharing our faith.
Exactly. And spiritual lethargy loves excuses.
Like what?
Like, oh, someone else will do that. Or I'm just too busy right now with my career, family, hobbies. Or I don't really have the right skills. Or even just feeling overwhelmed and choosing comfortable inaction instead,
All forms of saying, not me, not now.
which amounts to spiritual idleness. And the sermon warns that this creates a vacuum. When our spirit is lazy, when we're not actively pursuing God's purpose.
Something else fills the void.
Yes. Worldly concerns, fleshly desires, self-indulgence, they rush in, and that inevitably leads down a path of moral compromise and spiritual decay, just like it presumably did in Sodom, paving the way for the final abominations.
Is there scripture warning against this kind of indifference specifically?
The source points to Proverbs 10:5. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame.
Sleeping in harvest, so missing the crucial opportunity.
Exactly. The implication is that we are living in a spiritually significant time, a harvest season. To be spiritually lazy or asleep during this time is presented as not just unwise, but shameful, a waste of the opportunity and potential God has given.
How does this abundance of idleness look in our super busy modern world? We don't feel idle, we feel constantly busy.
That's a key point the sermon makes. We often mistake being busy with being purposeful in God's eyes.
So I can be frantically busy scrolling social media, consuming news, managing my schedule, pursuing hobbies, but still be spiritually idle.
If none of that activity is actually contributing to humility, to serving others, to connecting with God, to fulfilling his commands, then yes, from this perspective, it's just idleness disguised as activity. It's wasting the most valuable resource we have, time.
Wow. Okay, that hits close to home.
It's meant to. And that leads directly to the countermeasure, the antidote proposed in the sermon,
Which is?
reclaiming our time and finding true purpose. If spiritual lethargy grows in the soil of wasted time and self-indulgence, the way to fight it is found in Ephesians 5:16.
Ephesians 5:16.
The command is, redeeming the time because the days are evil.
Redeeming the time, what does that mean? Practically buying it back.
Kind of. It implies making the absolute most of the time we have. It's an active,
Sure.
intentional process. It means consciously evaluating how we spend our hours and energy.
Taking inventory of the time that's currently going towards maybe less important, self-focused things.
And intentionally redirecting that time and energy towards things that matter eternally, towards prayer, towards actively serving people in need, towards studying scripture, towards consciously obeying God's commands.
So it's about seriousness,
Yeah.
responding to the needs and the call with focus, not indifference.
Exactly. Sensitivity and seriousness rather than apathy. The sermon really emphasizes that our time, our life, is a gift from God. We're stewards of it. And we need to seriously examine how we're using that gift.
Because if we just let comfort and the spiritual indifference that often follows it dictate how we spend our days.
Then we are, in essence, adopting the lifestyle that characterized Sodom before its fall. We're setting ourselves up for ruin, even if we never commit those final headline-grabbing sins. It's the subtle underlying rot that does the real damage.
Okay, that brings us full circle. Pride, neglect born of abundance, and this spiritual lethargy. Those are the three roots.
That's the argument presented. Let's try and synthesize this as we wrap up.
Yeah, so we've walked through this reframing of the Sodom story based on Pastor Noah Kim's sermon and the focus on Ezekiel 16. It's a powerful case that the city's infamous destruction wasn't some random thunderbolt.
No, but the predictable, almost inevitable outcome of a deep-seated spiritual sickness that had been festering for a long time.
And that ultimate sickness, the final symptom, was the horrific sexual abomination we read about in
Right,
Genesis.
the rotting manifestation. But the disease itself started much earlier, much deeper in the spiritual root system.
And those roots, as identified from Ezekiel 16.49, were three interconnected failures. First,
Pride, that deep-seated self-sufficiency, rejecting God's authority, exalting the self, the constant I will mentality,
it's a second.
abundance of bread leading to neglect. When prosperity and comfort cause self-absorption, displace gratitude, and result in a systemic failure to care for the poor and needy.
And third,
Abundance of idleness. Not unemployment, but spiritual lethargy. Indifference to God's work, wasting time on self-indulgence, ignoring the needs of the harvest and the commands placed before us.
and the critical point is that these three, pride, prosperity-driven isolation, and spiritual apathy, they aren't just ancient history lessons about some uniquely wicked city.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The sermon presents them as universal, timeless, corrosive forces. They are actively at work today, potentially destroying lives, families, communities, regardless of our technology or culture.
So the real horror of Sodom, from this perspective, isn't just the fire and brimstone. It's that their fate was probably sealed by the quiet, everyday choices of its people long before that final judgment arrived. Choices rooted in pride, comfort, and indifference.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty provocative question to carry away from this deep dive, doesn't it?
I think so.
If our modern lives, with increasing material success for some, endless cultural comforts, constant digital distractions, if these things lead us to forget our foundational duties, duties like humility, gratitude, actively serving others,
And if they subtly encourage us towards a lifestyle where my will, my comfort, my plans become the ultimate deciding factors in our choices.
then the really uncomfortable question we have to ask ourselves honestly is this. Are we, maybe without even realizing it, right here in the midst of all our modern convenience and supposed progress, actually baiting our own version of Sodom? One comfortable choice, one moment of spiritual complacency, one self-focused priority at a time.